3 days before the election, the Wall Street Journal broke a remarkable story, which would be one of the biggest presidential candidate scandals ever if we were talking about any other presidential candidate. But the Journal's scoop right before the election was about candidate Donald Trump. And at that time, 3 days before the election, and maybe even still now, we didn't know what counted as a size large Donald Trump scandal versus just the normal kind of Trump scandal that breaks on your average Wednesday, and then another one on Thursday, and then another one on Saturday. What the Journal reported 3 days before the election, though, was kind of an amazing thing, even just on its face. It was a story about a Playboy playmate who had a story to tell about a long affair with Donald Trump, one that she says took place during his marriage, during Mr. Trump's marriage to Melania, his third and current wife, the soon-to-be First Lady. According to the Journal, in their story that came out 3 days before the election, this Playboy model had been paid $150,000 to not tell her story, to not talk about the affair before the election. I mean, even for a candidate like Donald Trump, that was a heck of a thing to ask the American public to swallow 3 days before the presidential election, I think particularly because it was about his current marriage. What seems to have insulated Trump from what you might otherwise have expected to be pretty significant fallout from that story is that the way the Journal told it, it wasn't Trump who was paying this young woman off to keep her silent. What the Wall Street Journal explained in that story is that it was the National Enquirer. Huh? Yeah, the rabidly pro-Trump wacky supermarket tabloid run by Trump's friend with the punchline name David Pecker. Turns out that's who paid off this Playboy model to not talk about her affair. It was David Pecker, har, not Trump. And that fact that there was some intermediary paying her rather than Trump paying her, that meant that scandalous story, as scandalous as it was still one step removed from Trump, right? When it came to who made these potentially illegal hush money payments to shut up a porn model about the presidential candidate right before the election. And I think because it was one step removed from Trump itself, because there was this other entity that appears to have paid the money, the story did not make that much of a splash, even though it landed 3 days before the election. Well, we now know from documents unsealed in federal court today that Trump was, quote, forgive me, pissed about that story coming out in the Wall Street Journal on the day that it came out. We also know that Trump's immediate orbit, including Hope Hicks and his lawyer, Michael Cohen, sent celebratory text messages to one another when the story did not appear to be getting much traction after it came out. Phew, it worked. The gambit to have a third party do the paying off, it worked to insulate Trump and to keep his election chances intact. I mean, that was a criminal scheme. That was a felony, to use a big cash payment to benefit Trump's campaign without ever declaring it as such. David Pecker and his company that fronted the hush money to the Playboy model on Trump's behalf to insulate Trump from any fallout if it all ever got exposed. David Pecker and his company cooperated with federal prosecutors and ultimately got themselves immunity from prosecution for their role in the deal in exchange for them testifying about it. It would also later emerge that a second hush money payment to a woman with a similar story would be paid around the same time. This time it was paid directly by Michael Cohen. And again, the scam worked for Trump. I mean, who's sitting in prison right now for having made that illegal hush money payment to the other woman, to Stormy Daniels? It's Michael Cohen. And although that payment was to benefit the Trump campaign, and Michael Cohen and prosecutors say that payment was directed by Trump, today we got unsealed in court the litany of calls and emails and texts involving the president himself and Cohen and Hope Hicks and Kellyanne Conway and the guys from the National Enquirer and the lawyer for the women who were getting these illegal payments. I mean, the president has numerous calls with Michael Cohen as Cohen is going back and forth with the woman's lawyer. Cohen is on the phone with the president as his first call right after he speaks with the woman's lawyer. The president is on the phone with Michael Cohen twice on the day before Cohen sends Stormy Daniels her $130,000. Less than 30 minutes after the second call with Trump, Cohen is out at the bank setting up a new bank account from which he'll make the payment. Then right after the payment is sent, Cohen is right back on the phone with Trump. I mean, we've got all that now from the case that prosecutors brought against Michael Cohen. But we've also only got that because they're apparently not going to bring a case against anybody else. So the scam worked, right? I mean, election chances intact. Neither of those women spoke about those affairs before the election. right? This is after the Access Hollywood tape, right? This was, the president had apologized for that. This was, right? Neither of those women spoke about those alleged affairs before the election. Election chances intact. Candidate himself insulated from the bad publicity at the time and the legal fallout in the end because he got other people to take the fall for him. The felonies were committed. They accomplished their aim, which was, in the end, to elect the candidate. And now elected, the candidate walks, despite extensive evidence obtained by the FBI, which we can now read, about the president's involvement in the planning and execution of this scheme. The federal judge who unsealed these documents yesterday warned about the weighty public ramifications of the conduct described in these materials. The judge called it a matter of national importance, what was revealed in these materials. He said it is, quote, time that every American has an opportunity to scrutinize these materials. Well, now we've got them and we can scrutinize them. And it turns out they show the president's apparently deep involvement in these campaign finance felonies that helped him get elected. So what do we do with this now? If what prosecutors are apparently letting us know is that he did it, but also he's getting away with it. What do we do with that now? Joining us now is Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Barb, I really appreciate you being here tonight. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rachel.
So I just want to first get your top-line reaction to all these pages that were unsealed today. The judge had given us a heads up saying that this is a matter of grave public importance and a lot of Americans were going to scrutinize this material once it was unsealed. What do you make of it now that you've had a chance to look through this stuff?
Well, first, I can see why the judge would want to make sure that this material was not kept secret from the public, that even though the government lawyers wanted to keep it secret, that it was important that it be revealed. Because what it says is that President Trump himself knew and participated in these calls. There's, as you said, a flurry of calls back and forth where President Trump gets on the phone with Michael Cohen as they discuss back and forth conversations with David Pecker, with the National Enquirer, and it all comes on the day after the Access Hollywood tape is released. So it seems to me very strong circumstantial evidence that President Trump was aware of this and was directing it, just as Michael Cohen said. I think one other thing, though, that's important is I don't know that that means it's criminal. Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to this, but an essential element of this crime is willfulness. And that means that you know it is a crime. You know that it is illegal. And it could be the case that they did not have evidence that President Trump knew that this was illegal.
If you wanted to ascertain somebody's intent, if you were prosecuting a case like this, presumably you would interview the person whose intent you had a question about, right?
Yes, that's one way, and certainly interviewing is important. You know, it goes back to Robert Mueller's decision not to interview Donald Trump. Right. Now, of course, he also carved this case out and handed it off to the Southern District of New York. So I don't know that this would have been within the scope of his questioning anyway, but that certainly would be one way, interviewing the person. You can also determine someone's intent based on the statements of other people. Hope Hicks, it sounds like, from these documents, was involved in conversations with President Trump to get him on the phone. What did she say about it? What did David Pecker know about all of it? And so it seems that you can also ascertain someone's intent from asking others. But it is a very high legal standard, and it is one that has stopped many cases in their tracks.
On the question of Hope Hicks, there's been some concern raised today by members of Congress that when Hope Hicks said that she was not privy to conversations about the hush money payments, that she didn't learn about them until November, there's been concern expressed today that Hope Hicks may have not been truthful in her testimony to Congress along these lines. The Judiciary Chairman, Gerald Nadler, has just put out a statement and sent a letter to Hicks demanding that she come back before the committee to clarify her testimony, essentially implying that she was untruthful when she answered questions about that. Is that a significant worry for Hope Hicks?
I think it is. Again, it's not 100% clear that she lied, but it's certainly there is some indication that she knew what was happening as early as October 8th about these calls. They don't have wiretap evidence knowing what the content was. All they know is that calls were made back and forth. They have some emails and they have some text messages. And so it does seem that she was involved in connecting President Trump and Michael Cohen as they're discussing these kinds of things. I don't know that it's clear that she knew exactly what the plan was, but I think at least it raises the question that people are going to want to know. And I also think it's important, Rachel, that even if Donald Trump did not technically commit a crime because you can't prove that legal element of willfulness, what he did was morally wrong. It was designed to betray the American people and to conceal from them on the eve of the election the truth about his past conduct with women.
Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Barb, thanks very much for helping us out, particularly that I can tell you are taking time out of a very lovely setting in Aspen in order to do it. That gives you double points with me.
All right. Thanks
very
much, Rachel.
All right. Much more here to come. I will tell you that presidential candidate Senator Amy Klobuchar is going to be here live in person with us in just a moment. I have been really looking forward to talking with her. She's here joining us next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.